The Human Soldier. Part 7. 2 years later, Marcus stood before another assembly, but this one was very different from the coalition ceremony where everything had begun. Instead of a formal arena filled with political dignitaries, he faced a gathering of beings in a converted cargo bay on a space station that officially didn't exist. The audience was smaller but more diverse than any coalition assembly, representing dozens of species and ideologies that had never been welcome in mainstream galactic society. Beside him, Kirabeth was no longer the nervous food service worker who had once tried to make herself invisible. She wore the confident bearing of someone who had helped establish 7 new alternative communities and facilitated peaceful contact between groups that had been isolated for generations. Her round face glowed with the satisfaction of someone who had found her true calling. "Friends," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the bay without amplification. "When we started this journey, we thought we were just 2 people looking for adventure. We had no idea we were joining something that had been waiting to happen for generations." The audience was a testament to how much had changed. There were refugees from 3 different wars, scientists whose research had been suppressed by corporate interests, artists whose work had been censored by authoritarian governments, and idealists who had been driven from their homeworlds for suggesting that societies could be organized differently. 2 years ago, Kirabeth continued, we discovered that the Forgotten Reaches weren't empty space filled with dangers. They were filled with possibilities that the established powers didn't want anyone to know about. She gestured toward the viewing ports, where the lights of 17 different settlements could be seen in the distance. What had once been a scattered collection of hidden refugees had become a loose confederation of alternative societies, each contributing its own innovations to a growing body of knowledge about peaceful civilization. "We've learned things that the Coalition's greatest scholars never imagined," Marcus said. "We've seen societies that have eliminated poverty without creating inequality, communities that have resolved conflicts without violence, and civilizations that have achieved technological advancement without destroying their environments." In the audience, Marcus could see faces that told stories of transformation. There was Dr. Helix, a Zeronian scientist who had been exiled for refusing to weaponize her genetic research, and who had used that same research to help create sustainable agriculture systems. Nearby sat Commander Trakos, a former Krillian military officer who had defected rather than participate in the conquest of peaceful worlds, and who now trained defense forces for communities that had never known war. "But the most important thing we've learned," Kirabeth said, "is that change doesn't require permission from those in power. It requires courage from those who are willing to build something better." The assembly erupted in cheers, but Marcus raised his hand for quiet. There was more to say, and some of it would be difficult to hear. "However," he continued, "our success has not gone unnoticed. Coalition intelligence has begun investigating unusual activity in the Forgotten Reaches. Corporate interests are funding expeditions to locate and exploit the resources they believe we must be hiding. And military forces are being positioned to respond to what they consider a potential threat to galactic stability." A murmur of concern rippled through the audience. They had all known this day would come, but knowing and experiencing were different things. "We face a choice," Kirabeth said, her voice steady despite the gravity of what they were discussing. "We can try to remain hidden, accepting that our impact will always be limited to those few who can find us in the darkness between stars. Or we can step into the light and show the galaxy what we've accomplished, knowing that doing so will make us targets." "There is a third option," said a voice from the back of the assembly. Guardian Zephylos moved forward, his mechanical arm catching the light as he gestured. "We can change the terms of engagement entirely." The assembly turned toward him, recognizing the authority of the being who had first shown Marcus and Kirabeth that alternative societies were possible. "For generations," Zephylos continued, "galactic civilization has been organized around the principle that someone must be in charge. Someone must be dominant. Someone must control the resources and direct the development of less powerful groups. Even benevolent governments operate from this assumption." He paused, looking around at the diverse faces of the assembly. "But what if we offered them something they've never seen before? What if we demonstrated a form of civilization so obviously superior to their own that even their leaders would have to acknowledge its benefits?" "You're talking about open contact," said Dr. Helix, her crystalline features reflecting her excitement. "Not hiding, not fighting, but engaging directly with coalition leadership and showing them what we've built." It's enormously risky, Commander Trakos pointed out. They could destroy us before we had a chance to prove anything. They could, Marcus agreed. But they could also choose to learn from us. And if they destroy us for offering them solutions to problems that have plagued galactic civilization for millennia, then every thinking being in known space will see exactly what their priorities really are. Kiribeth stepped forward, her voice carrying the same conviction that had inspired her to accept Marcus's original offer. 2 years ago, Marcus chose hope over power, and that choice changed both our lives. Now we have the chance to make the same choice for the galaxy. We can choose to believe that even the most entrenched power structures can evolve when confronted with better alternatives. And if we're wrong, asked Theta 9, who had traveled from Sanctuary Station specifically for this assembly. If we're wrong, Marcus said, then at least we'll have tried, and our failure will inspire others to try different approaches. Change is inevitable. The only question is whether it comes through evolution or revolution. The vote, when it came, was closer than Marcus had expected, but the decision was clear. By a margin of 2/3, the assembly chose engagement over isolation. 6 months later, Marcus and Kiribeth found themselves back where their journey had begun, standing before another coalition assembly. But this time they weren't alone. Representatives from 47 alternative societies stood with them, offering to share knowledge, technology, and social innovations that could transform galactic civilization. The response was everything they had hoped for and feared. Some coalition leaders embraced the opportunity to learn from societies that had solved problems their own civilizations couldn't address. Others viewed the alternative communities as threats to be eliminated or resources to be controlled, but the most important response came from individuals throughout coalition space who learned that alternatives existed. Within a year, dozens of new communities had been established by groups seeking to implement the principles they had learned from the Forgotten Reaches. Some succeeded, others failed, but all of them proved that change was possible. Standing on the bridge of Harmony's dream as they prepared for another expedition into uncharted space, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had started as a soldier who ended a war, become an explorer who discovered new worlds and evolved into something he had never expected to be. A catalyst for galactic transformation. Any regrets? Kiribeth asked, following his gaze toward the stars ahead of them. Marcus looked at his partner, his friend, his fellow revolutionary, and smiled. Only that we can't travel fast enough to see all the changes that are coming. Well, Kiribeth said, settling into her pilot's chair with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the universe, we've got the rest of our lives to try. As Harmony's dream launched toward the unknown regions beyond even the Forgotten Reaches, Marcus realized that the prize he had chosen in that arena so long ago had been even more valuable than he had imagined. He hadn't just chosen a companion for his adventures, he had chosen a partner in reshaping the galaxy itself, and they were just getting started. The Human Soldier, Part 6. Marcus and Kiribeth exchanged a look that spoke volumes. The question Guardian Zephylos had asked hung in the air between them like a bridge they would have to cross. Around them, the residents of Sanctuary Station waited quietly, their faces showing everything from hope to resignation. We won't tell them anything, Kiribeth said suddenly, her voice firm with conviction. Your location, your capabilities, your society structure, nothing that could lead to unwanted attention. But, Marcus added, seeing the question in Zephylos' eyes, we can't pretend we never met you. What we've learned here has changed how we see everything. Theta 9 stepped forward, his optical sensors focusing intently on them. Explain what you mean by changed how you see everything. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been building throughout their tour. For years, I've watched coalition species struggle with the same problems over and over. Resource conflicts, cultural tensions, technological stagnation. Everyone assumes these are just natural consequences of galactic civilization. But you've proven that's not true, Kiribeth continued, picking up his train of thought. You've shown that societies can evolve beyond those limitations. The question is how we share that knowledge without exposing you to danger. Nexara leaned forward on her walking stick, her ancient eyes bright with curiosity. You speak as if you have a plan forming. Maybe we do, Marcus said slowly. What if instead of reporting about Sanctuary Station, we start asking different questions when we return to Coalition space? What if we begin challenging the assumptions that keep societies trapped in destructive patterns? You want to become teachers, Morgan observed. Spreading ideas rather than information. Exactly, Kirabeth said, her excitement growing. We can share the principles we've learned without revealing where we learned them. We can encourage other people to think about cooperation instead of competition, acceptance instead of exclusion. Zeflos was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful. It's a noble goal, but change is difficult. Most societies resist new ideas, especially ones that challenge their fundamental structures. Most societies, yes, Marcus agreed. But not all individuals do. There are people throughout coalition space who are looking for better ways to live, better ways to organize their communities, people who have been rejected or overlooked just like your residents were. We could start small, Kirabeth added. Find the outcasts and misfits in coalition space, the ones who don't fit into traditional society. Share ideas with them about building something better. Kalara stepped forward, her scarred scales catching the light. You're talking about planting seeds of change throughout the galaxy. Ideas that could grow into new communities, new ways of thinking. But you'd be taking enormous risks, Theta 9 pointed out. Challenging established power structures makes you targets. The same forces that drove us to the Forgotten Reaches would oppose your efforts. Marcus felt Kirabeth's hand squeeze his gently. They both understood the risks, but they also understood something else now. We've already taken the biggest risk, Marcus said. We've learned that there's a better way to live. Once you know that, you can't just go back to accepting the old way as inevitable. Besides, Kirabeth added with a smile, we're already considered strange by coalition standards. A human who chose kindness over power, and a Balarian who refused to stay invisible. People will expect us to have unconventional ideas. Nexara laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. You know, when Zeflos and I first started building this station, people told us we were taking enormous risks too. They said refugees and outcasts could never create a stable society. And yet here you are, Marcus observed. Here we are, Zeflos agreed. Which brings me to a proposal. What if your relationship with Sanctuary Station didn't end here? The residents gathered closer, clearly knowing what their guardian was about to suggest. We've learned to live in isolation, Zeflos continued, but that doesn't mean we want to remain completely cut off from the galaxy. What if you became our informal ambassadors? Our connection to the wider universe? You could visit other hidden communities in the Forgotten Reaches, Theta 9 suggested. We know of several settlements that might welcome friendly contact. You could help build a network of alternative societies. And when you return to coalition space, Kalara added, you could identify others who might benefit from knowing that alternatives exist, not recruiting them directly, but letting them know they have options. Marcus felt excitement building in his chest. This was bigger than exploration or adventure. This was the chance to be part of fundamental change, to help build bridges between isolated communities and maybe eventually create something that could challenge the galaxy's entrenched power structures. There's one more thing, Morgan said quietly. If you're going to be carrying ideas between different communities, you'll need to understand more than just our approach. Each hidden settlement has developed its own solutions to the challenges of alternative civilization. You could become scholars of possibility, learning from each community and sharing knowledge between them. A traveling university of social innovation, Kirabeth breathed, her eyes wide with possibility. But also, Nexara warned gently, a very dangerous endeavor. Knowledge is power, and those who profit from current power structures won't appreciate your efforts to redistribute either one. Marcus looked around at the faces of the residents, seeing in them the same mixture of hope and determination that he had felt when he first chose Kirabeth over all the treasures the coalition could offer. We need time to think about this, he said finally. It's a bigger commitment than we were expecting when we set out. Of course, Zeflos said. Take all the time you need. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like while you consider your options. Actually, Kirabeth said, I think we both already know what we want to do. The question isn't whether we're willing to take the risks. It's whether we're capable of doing justice to the opportunity. She turned to Marcus, and he saw in her expression the same certainty he felt in his own heart. Marcus, do you remember what you told me when you first offered me this partnership? You said you wanted someone to share adventures with, someone to see the galaxy with, Well, I can't think of any adventure more important than helping people discover they can build better lives for themselves. Marcus smiled, feeling the same click of certainty he had experienced when he first saw her in the arena. Then I guess we're not just explorers anymore. We're revolutionaries. The residents of Sanctuary Station erupted in cheers, their diverse voices creating a harmony that had never been heard in Coalition space. As Marcus and Kiribeth shook hands with their new allies, they both realized that their journey together had led them to something far greater than either had imagined possible. They were no longer just two people traveling the galaxy. They had become part of a movement that could change everything. The Human Soldier, Part 5. The delegation waiting for them in the docking bay was the most diverse group Marcus had ever seen. There were species he recognized from Coalition space mixed with others that were completely unknown to him. But what struck him most was not their variety, but the atmosphere among them. Despite their obvious differences, they stood together with the easy familiarity of people who had learned to depend on each other. Guardian Zephylos stepped forward as Marcus and Kiribeth disembarked from their ship. He was clearly Zeronian in origin, but his silver skin was marked with deep scars, and one of his arms had been replaced with an elegant mechanical prosthetic. His eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much, but they also held kindness. "Welcome to Sanctuary Station," he said, his voice carrying the same tired warmth they had heard over communications. "I am Zephylos, and these are some of our residents." As introductions were made, Marcus began to understand what the Guardian had meant about being unwanted. There was Kalara, a Krillian female whose scales had been discolored by chemical burns, marking her as a survivor of industrial accidents that her society preferred to forget. Beside her stood Theta 9, an artificial intelligence construct whose original creators had tried to delete him when he developed what they considered inappropriate emotional responses. "This is Morjin," Zephylos continued, indicating a being that Marcus didn't recognize. "His people are pacifists who were conquered by a militaristic neighbor. He refused to fight even in self-defense, so both sides eventually rejected him." The introductions continued, each story revealing another way that the galaxy's various societies had failed their own people. There were scientists whose discoveries had been deemed too dangerous, artists whose work had been declared subversive, and individuals whose only crime had been being different from what their cultures expected. "How did you all find this place?" Kiribeth asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity rather than pity. "We built it together," said a voice from the back of the group. A small elderly being shuffled forward, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "I am Nexara, chief engineer of this station. 40 years ago, Zephylos and I met in a refugee camp on the Outer Rim. We were both running from societies that had no place for us." She gestured with her walking stick toward the vast spaces visible beyond the docking bay. "We decided that if no society wanted us, we would build our own. We started with a derelict mining platform and expanded from there. Every refugee we met, every outcast looking for a home, we invited them to join us, and they said yes?" Marcus asked. "Most did," Zephylos replied. "When you've been rejected by your own people, the idea of building something new becomes very appealing. We've created a society based on acceptance rather than exclusion, cooperation rather than competition." Theta 9 stepped forward, his optical sensors whirring softly as they focused on Marcus and Kiribeth. "Guardian Zephylos, if I may ask our guests a question." "Of course." "We have monitored Coalition communications for many years," the AI said, his synthesized voice carrying genuine curiosity. "Most exploration missions are followed by military or corporate expeditions, seeking to exploit new discoveries. What makes you different?" Marcus felt Kiribeth's hand slip into his, a gesture of support that had become natural over the past weeks. "We're different because we're not here representing anyone but ourselves. We're not scouts for the Coalition or advance agents for corporate interests. We're just two people who wanted to see what was out here. But surely you have some goal," Kalara said, her scarred scales catching the station's artificial lighting. "Exploration for its own sake is rare among Coalition species." Kiribeth spoke up, her voice carrying the confidence that had been growing since she first accepted Marcus's offer. "Our goal is to learn, to understand, to maybe help if we can, but mostly just to see the galaxy as it really is, not as the Coalition wants it to be." "And what have you learned so far?" Nexara asked with a slight smile. Marcus looked around at the group of beings who had been rejected by their own societies, but had found purpose together. We've learned that the most interesting people in the galaxy are usually the ones that others overlook, and that sometimes the best societies are the ones built by people who were told they didn't belong anywhere else. Zephylos nodded slowly. An interesting perspective. Would you like to see more of our station? I think you might find our approach to civilization educational. As they began walking through the station's corridors, Marcus was struck by how different it felt from Coalition facilities. Where Coalition architecture emphasized efficiency and hierarchy, Sanctuary Station seemed designed around comfort and community. The passages were wide enough for multiple species to walk together, and the lighting was warm and adjustable to accommodate different visual needs. This section houses our agricultural domes, Nexera explained as they passed through a junction where the walls were transparent, revealing vast spaces filled with growing plants. We've combined farming techniques from 17 different worlds to create sustainable food production that can support our diverse population. But more importantly, added Morgan, we've created spaces where people can work together regardless of their physical differences or cultural backgrounds. The Krillian strength requirement for heavy lifting complements Balerian precision and delicate cultivation work, while artificial intelligences like Theta-9 can monitor multiple environmental systems simultaneously. Kiribeth stopped at one of the viewing windows, watching a mixed group of beings working together in the agricultural dome. It's beautiful, she said softly. Not just the farming, but the way everyone moves together. Like they're all part of something bigger. That's exactly what we are, Zephylos said. When you've all been rejected for being different, you learn to value those differences instead of seeing them as problems to be solved. They continued the tour, visiting workshops where cast-off technologies were combined in innovative ways, living spaces designed to accommodate wildly different species requirements, and common areas where the station's residents gathered to share meals and stories. How do you make decisions? Marcus asked as they observed a community meeting in progress. With so many different species and cultures, how do you reach consensus? We don't try to, Theta-9 replied. We've learned that seeking consensus often means forcing everyone to accept the least objectionable option. Instead, we seek understanding. We make sure everyone's needs are heard and considered. Then we find solutions that work for our specific situation. Sometimes that means accepting that we'll have multiple approaches to the same problem, Kalara added. Different groups handling things in different ways as long as they don't interfere with each other. It sounds chaotic, Kiribeth observed. It is, Nexara said with a laugh. But it's productive chaos. When you're not trying to force everyone into the same mold, you discover that diversity of approach often leads to better solutions than uniformity. As the tour continued, Marcus began to understand something that surprised him. This wasn't just a refuge for outcasts. It was a genuinely advanced civilization that had developed beyond anything in Coalition space. Their technology was more adaptive, their society more inclusive, and their approach to problems more creative. Guardian Zephylos, Marcus said during a pause in their tour, I have to ask you something. Why haven't you made contact with the Coalition? You've clearly developed solutions to problems that plague every major civilization in known space. Zephylos was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful. Marcus, tell me honestly, if Coalition leadership learned about our society, what do you think would happen? Marcus felt his stomach sink as he realized what the Guardian was getting at. They'd want to study you, document your methods, figure out how to replicate your success, and then they'd want to control it, Kiribeth said quietly, understanding dawning in her voice. They'd want to manage your society, standardize your approaches, make them fit Coalition protocols. Exactly, Zephylos said sadly. We've built something beautiful here because we were free to build it our own way. The moment we become officially recognized by galactic powers, we become a resource to be managed rather than a community to be respected. But that means you're trapped out here, Marcus said. Cut off from the rest of the galaxy, are we? Morgan asked. We have everything we need here. We have purpose, community, and the freedom to grow in our own direction. What more would contact with Coalition space give us? Marcus thought about that question as they completed their tour. By the time they returned to the docking bay, he realized that Sanctuary Station had achieved something that no Coalition world had managed. A truly peaceful, prosperous society built on acceptance rather than dominance. "We need to ask you something," Zephylos said as they prepared to say goodbye. "You've seen our society, learned our story. When you return to Coalition space, what will you tell them about us?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading. They had come seeking adventure and discovery, but they had found something that could change the galaxy if it fell into the wrong hands. The Human Soldier, Part 4. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the starship Harmony's Dream, watching the last Coalition beacon disappear behind them as they entered the Forgotten Reaches. The ship was a marvel of cooperative engineering, designed by multiple species working together for the first time in decades. Balarian environmental systems for long-term sustainability, Krillian defensive shields, Zeronian navigation computers, and human adaptive controls that could be modified for any situation. Kiribeth sat in the co-pilot's chair, her round face pressed against the viewport as she watched unknown stars wheel past. Over the past 3 weeks, Marcus had watched her transform from a nervous food service worker into someone who seemed to glow with purpose. The Coalition had provided them with extensive training in exploration protocols, xenobiology, and first contact procedures, and Kiribeth had absorbed everything with an enthusiasm that amazed their instructors. "Look at that," she breathed, pointing to a stellar formation unlike anything in Coalition space. 3 binary systems in orbital resonance with each other. The gravitational interactions must create such beautiful patterns. Marcus smiled. During their training, it had become clear that Kiribeth possessed an intuitive understanding of complex systems that formal education had never developed. She could look at a star chart and immediately spot patterns that took trained navigators hours to identify. Dr. Yolandra had called it natural genius and suggested that Balarian brains might be evolutionarily optimized for understanding interconnected relationships, Kiribeth said, turning from the viewport with excitement. "The long-range sensors are detecting something unusual. A massive artificial structure in the next system over." Marcus moved to the sensor console, reading the data streams that painted a picture of something impossible. The structure was roughly spherical, approximately the size of Earth's moon and definitely artificial. But according to the sensors, it was also completely dormant, emitting no energy signatures beyond basic thermal radiation. "Could be a derelict space station," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Or maybe a probe left by an extinct civilization. Or," Kiribeth added with growing excitement, "it could be inhabited by people who prefer not to announce their presence to passing ships." They looked at each other for a moment, both thinking the same thing. This was exactly the kind of discovery they had hoped to make, but it was also potentially dangerous. Coalition protocols recommended maintaining safe distance from unknown artificial structures and calling for military backup before attempting contact. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "Do we follow the safe approach and report this back to Coalition space, or do we try the friendly approach?" Kiribeth was quiet for a moment, studying the sensor readings. "Marcus, look at this power distribution pattern. It's not random decay from a derelict structure. It's deliberately minimized, like someone is trying very hard not to be noticed." She was right. The energy signature was too controlled to be accidental, but also too faint to be easily detected without close-range sensors. "They're hiding," Marcus realized. "The question is whether they're hiding from us specifically or from everyone in general." "Only one way to find out," Kiribeth said, her fingers already moving over the communication controls. "This is the exploration vessel Harmony's Dream, calling any inhabitants of the artificial structure and system designation FN4471. We come in peace and friendship, seeking dialogue and cultural exchange." They waited. The transmission would take several minutes to reach the structure, and several more for any response to return. Marcus found himself holding his breath, aware that they were potentially making first contact with a species unknown to the Coalition. The response, when it came, was unlike anything they had expected. "Harmony's Dream," said a voice that the translator rendered as elderly and tired. "This is Sanctuary Station. We have been monitoring your approach since you entered our system. Your ship configuration is unknown to us, but your transmission protocols suggest Coalition origin. State your intentions." The voice paused, then continued with what sounded like resignation. "We should warn you that this station has no resources worth taking, no strategic value, and no inhabitants of interest to galactic powers. If you are here for conquest or exploitation, you will find only disappointment." Marcus and Kirabeth exchanged glances. The response suggested a history of bad experiences with Coalition contact. Sanctuary Station, Kirabeth replied. We are not here for conquest or exploitation. We are explorers seeking to understand the galaxy and its peoples. If you are willing, we would like to request permission to dock and meet your inhabitants. Another long pause. When the response came, the voice sounded suspicious but curious. Explorers? Not military scouts or corporate surveyors. Just explorers, Marcus confirmed, taking over the communication. My name is Marcus Chen and my companion is Kirabeth. We're traveling together to see what's out here and maybe make some friends along the way. Friends? The voice now sounded almost confused. You travel to the Forgotten Reaches seeking friendship? Why not? Kirabeth asked. Friendship is the best reason to travel anywhere. The silence that followed was so long that Marcus began to wonder if they had lost communication. Finally, the voice returned, but it sounded different somehow, more alive. Harmony's dream, this is Guardian Zephylos of Sanctuary Station. If you are truly seeking friendship, then you are welcome here, but I must warn you that we are not what most Coalition species would consider desirable company. Guardian Zephylos, Marcus replied. We've learned that the most interesting people are usually the ones that others consider undesirable company. As they approached the massive structure, its details became clearer through the viewports. The station was indeed moon-sized, but its surface was covered with what looked like agricultural domes, living spaces, and industrial facilities. It was clearly designed to be completely self-sufficient, a miniature world floating in space. Marcus, Kirabeth said softly, look at the construction techniques. This wasn't built by any species we know about. The architectural principles are completely different from anything in Coalition space. She was right. Where Coalition structures emphasized efficiency and standardization, this station seemed to prioritize organic curves and natural flow patterns. It looked more grown than built. Harmony's dream, you are cleared for docking at Bay 7, came the voice of Guardian Zephylos. We will meet you there, though I should prepare you for what you will see. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Sanctuary Station is home to refugees, outcasts, and beings who have been rejected by their home societies for various reasons. We are the unwanted of the galaxy, the ones who had nowhere else to go. If this troubles you, there is no shame in departing now. Marcus looked at Kirabeth, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her expression. Both of them had known what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, or considered unworthy of respect. Guardian Zephylos, Kirabeth said warmly. We look forward to meeting your people. Some of the best individuals we know are the ones that others failed to appreciate. As they approached the docking bay, Marcus felt a familiar flutter of nervous excitement. They were about to meet beings who might never have encountered humans or Balerians before. People who had built an entire civilization based on providing sanctuary for the unwanted. It felt like exactly the kind of adventure they had hoped to find. The docking, bay doors opened to reveal a delegation unlike anything in Coalition space, and Marcus realized their real journey was just beginning. The Human Soldier, Part 3. Kirabeth's smile transformed her entire face. Where before there had been resignation and quiet despair, now there was something bright and alive. She reached out slowly and took Marcus's hand, her fingers smaller and softer than his, but surprisingly warm. Yes, she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying across the silent arena. Yes, I would like that very much. The moment their hands touched, the arena exploded into chaos. Delegates from a dozen species began talking at once, some in outrage, others in confusion, and a few in what sounded like grudging approval. The Krillian delegation was particularly vocal, their harsh voices cutting through the noise with what the translators rendered as protests about unprecedented breaches of protocol and degradation of honored traditions. Commander Thexvar raised his clawed hands for silence, and gradually the noise subsided. The choice has been made and accepted, he announced formally. According to Coalition law, Kirabeth of Bellaria is now companion to Sergeant Marcus Chen of Earth, with all rights and privileges thereof. But surely there are procedures, Admiral Zexterra interjected. Background checks, compatibility assessments, cultural orientation seminars. Marcus helped Kirabeth to her feet, noting how she moved with more confidence now, as if accepting his offer had fundamentally changed something inside her. Admiral, with respect, we're not entering a business partnership. We're two people who've decided to travel together. I think we can figure out the details as we go. Where will you go? The question came from an unexpected source, Dr. Yelandra, the Coalition's chief xenobiologist. Her crystalline features reflected curiosity rather than judgment. The galaxy is a vast place, and now that the war is over, there are many opportunities for exploration and discovery. Marcus looked at Kiribeth. I hadn't really thought that far ahead. Any preferences? To everyone's surprise, Kiribeth spoke up immediately. The Forgotten Reaches, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I have always wanted to see the Forgotten Reaches. A new wave of murmurs swept the arena. The Forgotten Reaches were a section of space beyond the Coalition's outer rim, filled with uncharted systems and unexplored worlds. It was considered dangerous territory, home to space pirates, rogue AI constructs, and worse things that civilized species preferred not to discuss. Child, said Elder Morgoth, the ancient Balerian who served as his species' representative, the Forgotten Reaches are no place for our people. It is wild space full of dangers that our peaceful nature is not equipped to handle. Kiribeth turned to face the Elder, and Marcus was amazed to see steel in her expression. Honored Elder, with respect, our peaceful nature is exactly why someone should go there. Every world we discover, every species we encounter, we could approach with friendship instead of conquest. We could show them that not everyone who comes from Coalition space wants to exploit or dominate. She's right, said Captain Vorthak, surprising everyone by supporting the idea. The Reaches have been hostile to Coalition expansion for generations because every expedition we've sent has been military or corporate in nature. Perhaps it's time to try a different approach. Dr. Yelandra stepped forward, her crystalline features bright with excitement. Actually, this presents a fascinating opportunity. If you're serious about exploring the Reaches, the Coalition could provide you with a research vessel equipped for long-range exploration. Your discoveries could advance our understanding of galactic biodiversity immensely. And, added Counselor Hexna from the Trading Guild, establishing peaceful first contact with new species could open markets that have been closed to us for centuries. There could be significant economic benefits. Marcus felt Kiribeth's hand tighten in his. He could see the concern in her eyes as the conversation began shifting toward official Coalition interests and away from the simple adventure they had been discussing. Hold on, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the growing excitement of the delegates. Let's be clear about something. If we do this, we're not doing it as Coalition representatives or official explorers. We're doing it as two people who want to see what's out there. But surely you would accept Coalition support, Thexvar said. A ship, supplies, communication equipment? It would be foolish to venture into unknown space without proper resources. Marcus looked at Kiribeth again, reading the mixture of hope and worry in her expression. He realized she was afraid that their simple partnership was already being turned into something political and complicated. We'll accept a ship and basic supplies, Marcus said carefully, but no official mandate, no reporting requirements, and no Coalition flags or insignia. If we find new worlds or new species, we'll share that information freely, but we won't be ambassadors or advanced scouts for Coalition expansion. Unacceptable, Admiral Zextara said immediately. A hero of your status cannot simply disappear into uncharted space without proper oversight. The political implications alone. Admiral, Marcus interrupted. I'm a sergeant in the Coalition Defense Forces, not a political figure. My service record speaks for itself, but that doesn't make me responsible for galactic politics. The argument might have continued, but Kiribeth suddenly stepped forward, moving to stand beside Marcus rather than behind him. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised everyone who knew her. You are all thinking about this wrong. The arena fell quiet again. Attention focusing on the young Balerian who had been invisible just an hour ago. You see Marcus as a hero who ended a war, she continued. And you want to use that status for your own purposes. You see me as a nobody who somehow got lucky. But what if we're both just people who want to do something good with our lives? She gestured toward the treasure chest, its contents still glittering in the arena lights. Marcus could have chosen anything in that chest. Weapons that would make him powerful, territories that would make him wealthy, knowledge that would make him influential. Instead, he chose friendship. He chose hope. He chose someone who believes the galaxy can be better than it is. Her words were creating visible discomfort among some of the delegates, particularly those who had been discussing the political and economic benefits of their proposed expedition. "So if you want to help us," Kiribeth said, "then help us as friends, not as assets to be managed. Give us a ship because you believe in exploration, not because you want to control what we find. Support us because you think kindness matters, not because you want to profit from our discoveries." The arena was completely silent now. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched this woman who had been dismissed and ignored for years stand up to some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Elder Morgeth was the first to speak. "My daughter," he said softly, "I have not heard such wisdom from our people in many years. Perhaps the Forgotten Reaches need someone like you more than I realized." "Indeed," said Dr. Yolandra. "A scientific vessel, equipped for exploration and first contact with no strings attached. It seems like a reasonable investment in the future of galactic understanding." Marcus squeezed Kiribeth's hand gently. "So," he said, looking around the arena at the assembled delegates, "are we doing this?" The vote, when it came, was unanimous. The human soldier. Part 2. Marcus looked into Kiribeth's confused eyes and felt something settle in his chest, a certainty that surprised him with its strength. Around them, the arena remained frozen in shocked silence, hundreds of species representatives waiting for his explanation. "You want to know why I chose you?" Marcus asked softly, speaking only to her despite knowing every word was being recorded and broadcast across Coalition space. 3 days ago, during the Victory Feast preparations, I watched you work for 6 straight hours without a break. You cleaned up after people who didn't even acknowledge your existence. And when that Krillian officer deliberately knocked over an entire tray of food you had just prepared, you just smiled and started over." Kiribeth's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't realized anyone had noticed that incident. "But that wasn't what caught my attention," Marcus continued. "What caught my attention was what you did afterward. You saved the good portions from the spilled tray and quietly distributed them to the younger Balerian workers who hadn't eaten yet. You went hungry so others could eat, and you did it like it was the most natural thing in the world." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Some translator devices were working overtime as species who couldn't understand human expressions tried to process what they were hearing. "You think you're nothing special," Marcus said, "but I've fought alongside warriors from a dozen worlds and I've never seen courage like yours. It takes a special kind of strength to stay kind when the universe keeps telling you you're not worth kindness in return." Admiral Zextara stepped forward, her silvery skin reflecting the arena lights. "Sergeant Chen, with respect, kindness is admirable. But surely for a companion of your status you would want someone with skills that could aid in your future endeavors. Combat training, diplomatic experience, technical knowledge." Marcus finally turned to address the crowd, though he kept one hand extended toward Kiribeth in a gesture of support. "Admiral, may I ask you something? In your military service, what do you consider the most important quality in a soldier?" "Combat effectiveness, obviously," Zextara replied without hesitation. "And after that?" "Strategic thinking, the ability to analyze and adapt. And after that?" Zextara paused, clearly not seeing where this was leading. "Loyalty, I suppose. Dedication to the mission. All excellent qualities," Marcus agreed. "But you're missing the most important one. The quality that wins wars and builds civilizations. The quality that makes someone worth following into hell itself." He turned back to Kiribeth, who was listening with growing amazement as this conversation continued to revolve around her. "Hope," Marcus said simply. "The ability to believe that tomorrow can be better than today, even when today is terrible. The strength to keep trying when everyone else has given up. I've seen soldiers with perfect combat records break under pressure, but I've never seen truly hopeful people surrender to despair." Commander Thexvar approached, his claws clicking against the arena floor. "Sergeant, I begin to understand your reasoning, but you must realize that choosing a companion of such modest background reflects upon humanity's status within the Coalition. Other species may view this as a sign that humans lack ambition or proper understanding of galactic politics." The arena erupted in agreeing murmurs from various delegations. Marcus could hear the Krillian representatives discussing among themselves, and their tone suggested they were already crafting reports about humanity's naive approach to power. "Commander," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly across the arena, "I think you're absolutely right. Other species probably will view this as a sign about humanity, and I hope they do. The murmurs stopped abruptly. I hope they realize that when humans are given the chance to choose anything in the galaxy, we don't choose weapons or territories or political advantages. I hope they understand that we choose people who make the universe a little bit brighter, just by existing in it. Marcus gestured toward the treasure chest that still sat open, its contents glittering under the arena lights. Every item in that chest represents something humans supposedly should want: power, knowledge, advancement. But what good is any of that if we lose sight of what makes us human in the first place? A new voice spoke up from the crowd. It was Captain Vorthak, a grizzled Krillian veteran who had fought alongside Marcus during the final assault on the Swarm command ship. "Human," he said in his gravelly voice. "You speak of hope and kindness as military virtues. These are not qualities that win battles." Marcus smiled grimly. "Captain, with respect, you're wrong. Hope and kindness are exactly what win battles. They're what convince people to fight for something bigger than themselves. They're what keep soldiers going when everything seems lost." He paused, looking around the arena at representatives from species that had been part of the coalition for centuries. Species that had fought wars and built empires and accumulated vast territories. "How many of your civilizations," Marcus asked, "in all your centuries of conquest and expansion, have actually managed to defeat something like the Void Swarm? How many of you have faced an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with, bought off, or intimidated?" The silence that followed was telling. The Void Swarm had been terrorizing the galaxy for generations, growing stronger with each world they consumed. Every major military power had tried and failed to stop them. The Swarm couldn't be beaten with better weapons or superior tactics, Marcus continued. They had both of those things. They could only be beaten by someone willing to do something completely insane, because it was the right thing to do. Someone who still believed that impossible things could happen if you were willing to pay the price for them. He turned back to Kiribeth, who had been following the conversation with growing wonder. "You asked why I chose you," he said gently. "It's because I've spent 2 years watching how different species treat the people they consider beneath them. I've seen how power corrupts even the best intentions. But you, working in a job that nobody respects, dealing with people who barely acknowledge your existence, you never stopped believing that kindness mattered. You never stopped hoping that things could be better." Marcus extended his hand to her. "So I'm asking again, would you like to see what the galaxy looks like when you're not serving someone else's meals? Would you like to find out what adventures are waiting for someone brave enough to believe in impossible things?" Kiribeth stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Around them, the entire arena held its breath. Politicians, generals, and diplomats from across the galaxy waited to see if a humble food service worker would accept partnership with the most celebrated hero in coalition space. Slowly, her round face began to change. The sadness in her large eyes gave way to something else entirely. Something that hadn't been there before but was growing stronger by the second. For the first time since Marcus had noticed her, Kiribeth smiled. The Human Soldier. Part 1. The arena fell silent as Commander Thexvar's claws clicked against the ceremonial podium. Around him, representatives from 12 different species watched with varying degrees of interest and disdain. The Galactic Defense Coalition's victory celebration had been going on for 3 standard cycles, but this moment was what everyone had been waiting for. "The War of the Crimson Nebula is over," Thexvar announced, his reptilian voice carrying across the vast chamber. "The Void Swarm has been defeated, pushed back into the dark spaces between stars where they belong. This victory belongs to all of us, but there is one among us who turned the tide of battle." Sergeant Marcus Chen stood at attention among the other coalition soldiers, his human frame looking small compared to the towering Krillian warriors beside him. His olive-green uniform was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the battle-scarred armor he had worn just days ago when he single-handedly destroyed the Swarm's command vessel. The memory of that desperate spacewalk, armed with nothing but magnetic charges and a prayer, still felt surreal. Marcus had joined the coalition 2 years ago when Earth finally gained membership after proving humanity's worth in the Outer Rim conflicts. Most species still viewed humans as newcomers, barely evolved primates who had stumbled into space travel. The fact that a human had ended the war seemed to sit uncomfortably with many of the assembled dignitaries. "Sergeant Chen," Thexvar continued, his yellow eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. Your actions saved millions of lives across 17 worlds. The Coalition owes you a debt that cannot be repaid with mere medals or rank promotions. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had hoped for a quiet ceremony, maybe a commendation to send home to his parents in Chicago. This felt like it was building towards something much bigger. According to Coalition tradition, Thexvar said, gesturing to a ornate chest that 2 Krillian guards carried forward, a warrior who achieves such a decisive victory is granted the prize of choosing. You may select any treasure from the Coalition's vault. Any technology, any knowledge, any... His voice paused meaningfully. Any person willing to serve as your companion. The chest opened with a soft hiss, revealing data crystals containing star maps to uncharted systems, weapons technology that could level mountains, and medical advances that could extend life for centuries. But Marcus's attention wasn't on the treasure. His eyes had found something else entirely. In the far corner of the arena, behind a section of viewing stands reserved for Coalition support staff, sat a group of beings that most attendees ignored entirely. They were the cleaners, technicians, and food service workers who kept the Coalition running. Among them, trying to make herself invisible, was a young Balerian female. Balerians were considered one of the lesser species in the Coalition hierarchy. They were short, soft-bodied humanoids with round faces and gentle dispositions. Their homeworld was peaceful but resource-poor, and most Balerians in Coalition space worked in service positions. This particular female was noticeably overweight by any species standards, her blue-tinted skin showing signs of poor nutrition despite her size. Her large, dark eyes held a sadness that Marcus recognized from his own mirror during his worst days. She was wearing a simple food service uniform, and Marcus could see the slight tremor in her hands as she noticed his gaze. Around her, other Balerians seemed to be whispering, occasionally glancing in her direction with what looked like embarrassment. Marcus had seen her before during the victory feast preparations. While other service staff joked and chatted during their breaks, she worked alone, methodically cleaning tables and refilling dispensers. He had noticed how other Coalition members treated her with casual dismissal or outright rudeness, as if her size made her less worthy of basic courtesy. "Well, Sergeant?" Thexvar prompted. "What is your choice?" The arena held its breath. Marcus could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that he would choose something that reflected humanity's growing ambitions in galactic politics, a star map that would give Earth new colonies, a weapon that would elevate human military status, perhaps even partnership with one of the attractive Zeronian diplomatic corps members who had been making overtures since news of his victory spread. Instead, Marcus stepped forward and pointed toward the service section. "Her," he said clearly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I choose her." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled crowd. Whispers erupted in a dozen languages. Marcus heard the Krillian delegate behind him emit what sounded like a snort of disbelief. "Sergeant," Thexvar said carefully, his translator struggling with what seemed to be confusion. "Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of the prize of choosing. You may select any companion willing to serve. But surely you mean one of our decorated officers? Or perhaps a cultural liaison who could—" "I understand perfectly," Marcus interrupted, breaking protocol by speaking without permission. "I choose her, the Balerian female in food service." Every eye in the arena turned toward the service section. The young Balerian female looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. Her colleagues had backed away from her, leaving her sitting alone as hundreds of the galaxy's most powerful beings stared in her direction. But why? The question came from Admiral Zextara, the Coalition's highest-ranking Zeronian officer. Her melodious voice carried genuine bewilderment. "She is nobody special. A menial worker. Surely a hero of your caliber would prefer a companion of greater status?" Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "What's her name?" The question caught everyone off guard. Thexvar looked toward the service section, then back at Marcus. "Her name, that is not typically her name," Marcus repeated firmly. One of the Balerian supervisors eventually shuffled forward. "She is called Kirabeth, Honored Sergeant. She has served in Coalition food service for 3 standard years." "Kirabeth," Marcus said, testing the name. He began walking toward the service section, ignoring the protests from Coalition officials behind him. The crowd parted reluctantly as he made his way across the arena floor. Kirabeth watched him approach with growing panic in her large eyes. When he stopped in front of her, she immediately tried to stand and bow, nearly stumbling in her haste. "Please," Marcus said gently in Coalition standard. "Don't bow. I'm Marcus. What I'm about to ask you is completely your choice, and you can say no without any consequences. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her confusion was obvious. "The Coalition tradition says I can choose a companion. If you're willing, I'd like that companion to be you. Not as a servant, but as a partner. Someone to share adventures with. Someone to see the galaxy with. Would you be interested in something like that?" The arena had gone completely silent. Even the translator devices seemed to have stopped their quiet humming. Kirabeth stared at him for a long moment before finding her voice. "But why me? I am nothing special. I am not beautiful or skilled or important." Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the ceremony began, he felt completely sure of his choice.